Welcome to our PRBI live session today. I'm your host Tarunjit Ratan, and today we have a very intriguing topic to discuss: how not to go viral. Strange, isn't it? Typically, brands love to go viral. And in fact, I have had many a client brief me with a specific ask of creating a PR campaign that will help us go viral. And now times have changed. We today have brands asking us how to stop them from going viral. And to help us decode this, today joining us for the live session is our PRBI member, Amy Rotenberg, President Rotenberg Associates from the Power City of DC. She has had extensive experience in this particular niche and has advised many a client on the same. So I'm going to share a little bit more information about her before we add her on. She is the founder and president of Rotenberg Associates in Washington, D.C., and she combines 2 decades of experience in crisis management, strategic communications, with 10 years as a media lawyer and trial attorney. She provides strategic counsel, communications counsels to clients facing adverse publicity in connection with federal and state litigation, government litigations, product recalls, employee malfeasance, media probes, and other reputational issues. And if you were facing such a challenge, trust me, you would want Amy on your team. So let me add her on. Hi, Amy. How are you doing?
Hello, Taryn. Great to see you. Great to be here.
Lovely to have you join us here today. I know it's early in the morning for you there. So I'm curious to know, you are an attorney working in strategic communications in DC. How did you make this professional leap? What prompted you to join communication?
Well, it's a little bit of an unusual path. I'm happy to share. I spent about 10 years as a First Amendment media lawyer. First Amendment in the United States, you may know, is the part of our Constitution that guarantees free speech. And I spent 10 years representing media organizations, newspapers, television stations, and radio stations, helping them do the news, get access to information, and then when they got sued, I defended them in court. But after about 10 years of that, I decided to switch sides. And instead of helping the media do these sometimes controversial stories, I decided to help the targets of negative media deal with it. And so I moved from my big law firm to a very large public relations firm in the United States, where I launched their crisis and litigation communications practice. And from there, I started my own company, which we, since 2004, so it's been a long time. And we now represent clients all over the United States, some also in foreign countries, helping them sort of manage this intersection between law and communications when they have bad news.
That's very interesting. Though, what is is it not possible for a PR professional who is in communication for a long time to be able to manage this? Does this require a law degree? And is that one of the unique aspects that you bring to the table?
I wouldn't say it's required. I have many talented colleagues who do not have a law degree or an experience in the legal profession. But I will say it's been tremendously valuable to my clients, this combination of experience and expertise that I bring to the table. We are able to work directly with our clients' lawyers and do so with protections of attorney-client privilege. A lot of times this is, managing a crisis is more than just putting the words on paper. It's really about trying to solve the problem, to contain the crisis. And so even though I'm not the one, going to be the lawyer on the matter, the clients usually have lawyers who will be the ones who will argue for them in court and represent them in other legal settings. I can't turn the legal part of my brain off, and it becomes an essential part of the problem solving that I do with my clients.
Absolutely. I'm sure it's a winning combination for a lot of clients who have you on board. So help us understand what goes on behind the scenes. How do you help clients during a crisis?
Well, many times it just depends on what kind of crisis it is. If it's a litigation that has already started, or a government investigation that is already underway, Usually lawyers don't want their clients to speak about this. And that's a problem because whoever filed the lawsuit or whoever has started a government investigation has the advantage of being able to tell a story. It's their narrative. And when a lawyer says, oh no, don't, comment, we can't comment because we have pending litigation, that means the client's side of the story never comes out. And that's a problem because so many cases get resolved before there's a trial, settled with terms of confidentiality, and their story is never told. So one of the things that I help my clients do is be able to talk about their bad news, to be able to give another narrative that will allow the public to say, oh, there's another side to this, and not just immediately leap to conclusions that the client has done something wrong or bad or is guilty. And that's the easiest one. Those are the easiest, the litigations that are already pending. But there's other kinds of crises too. The client might be the subject of protests where there's picketing and boycotting, sometimes in person at their businesses, sometimes online. Those things need to be managed, and it's a bunch of different skills there to neutralize those adversaries and find a way to resolve the crisis and protect the client's reputation.
Absolutely. So, you are in a very unique position to advise PR professionals as well. I mean, increasingly during a crisis, especially, we find ourselves dealing with the legal team as well. And honestly, they always kind of err on the side of caution. But there are times that, they butt heads with the PR guys because there is like you mentioned, at some point you have to get your narrative out, right? You need to be able to decide that. So what is your advice to PR professionals dealing with lawyers? Because their preference is to clamp down on everything.
You're absolutely right, Tyrone. Absolutely. And I kind of divide the world of lawyers into those that get it and those that don't get it. And there are many lawyers who understand the role of the court of public opinion and the need to protect their clients' reputations, even while they're going through a difficult legal problem. But there's many lawyers who just only focus on the legal problem, and they're absolutely don't understand what are the reputation management pieces. So if you are the PR person in that situation, it is very challenging. I'm really not going to sugarcoat it. It's very challenging. And I think the best advice that I can give to those PR professionals who don't have law degrees like I do, to listen very carefully, to try to build, some kind of an alliance with that lawyer, try to earn their trust and respect, in which you can share your perspective on what would be beneficial to the client, understanding that both you and the lawyers have the same goal, which is to help the client.
Absolutely. But I've always seen more battles happen there in that boardroom between the legal and the PR guys as compared to outside. But I guess having an ally there always helps, and having you on the team will always help.
Well, I will say that it has been helpful to my clients because I speak the lawyer's language. And when I come into the room, I do most of the time earned the trust and respect of those attorneys, and we can get right to the heart of what the problems are, what the legal issues are, and they look at me as a partner to them, where they can do their best work for the client and I can do mine. And I think it has been I'm grateful, frankly, to have this background that allows me to do this for my clients.
Absolutely wonderful. I think, everything you learn in life leads you up to a certain position that you're meant to be at. Interesting. So you are in DC, right? And
Yes.
we just is ahead from the election results in the US. It's an interesting time to be in that particular city today, I'm assuming. Any observations on that? Predictions about what happens next? We have to ask you, right?
Right.
You're in thick of things right now.
I'm in the thick of things here in Washington. I was in the thick of things on election day. I spent the whole day in Northeast Philadelphia, really the belly of the beast at this during this election cycle. And I'm going to tell you, the mood here is very tense. It's people are very stressed, overwhelmingly in DC. DC went overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. And so among the people who live here and mostly work in Washington, D.C., they are looking for a change, and they are looking for a better outcome here. But this is a national election, and it's going to be very close. And everybody just is waiting to see. There aren't protests yet. We have not seen that, although if I look out my window, my entire neighborhood has been boarded up. I live right in the center of Washington, D.C., not too far from actually where the Obama family lives, and also where Jared and Ivanka live. And our neighborhood is completely boarded up in preparation for big protests. So I hope we don't see that. One of the hallmarks, frankly, to our international audience here, the hallmarks of American democracy has been our peaceful transition of power and the confidence that Americans have in our electoral system. And I hope that we can maintain that, and that it's the institutions that survive and are not too damaged by any one individual candidate. Our Constitution and our system is much bigger than any one candidate.
Absolutely. We hope so too. But it looks like this time, whoever wins, there is going to be a protest march either which ways. So that brings me to individual campaigns. We have a question for you. If you were on Biden's team, what would be your advice to him?
Advice to who? I'm sorry.
Joe Biden.
Oh, to Joe Biden. Well, I think my advice would be probably the same as he's getting right now, which is that he is presenting himself as very presidential. He's not prematurely calling the election for himself, even though at this moment it does look like, he has pulled ahead. It looks like he's going to hold that lead. All signs are that he is going to be the president-elect. But I think he's made the right decision to allow the vote to be counted, every vote, and whatever subsequent process, right? Canvassing, going back and checking to make sure there were no mistakes. In some instances, if they have to do a recount because the margin is so small, to let that process play out, and whoever wins and whoever loses, it's fair game. All of this to make sure to protect the confidence and trust of the American people in the system. So I think he's doing everything exactly right. And I would give the advice that he's obviously being given and accepting from his professional team.
Absolutely. And what about Mr. Donald Trump? If you were to advise him at this point, what would be best advice to him?
Well, I would give the following advice, but I will just give the caveat that I'm fairly certain he won't listen, because he doesn't listen mostly to advisors. His whole presidency and the campaign, is a one-man show where there have been advisors who've given him good counsel that he has disregarded. But if I was asked to give him the advice, I would give him the same advice, which is to say, allow the system to play itself out. Let the votes be counted. If you have evidence that there's been any fraud or any kind of miscount or a problem with any process, we have a solution for that, which is called, you can bring it to the courts. I think he's planning to do that. But in the meanwhile, he has sown a lot of distrust among millions of Americans in our system. And I think that is extremely dangerous and probably the worst possible thing you could do if you truly love our country, which he claims he does. He claims to be a patriot. He claims to love our country. But this kind of sowing the seeds of doubt and undermining confidence in the system is extremely, extremely damaging. And I will just point out that it's also not consistent, because if he thinks that the system was rigged, and if he thinks that there was widespread fraud, then it must mean that all of the Republican senators who won their, seats, also those things happened in a fraudulent election. Should we overturn those? Obviously, he doesn't think we should.
Well, it's as per convenience, I guess.
Yes.
I hope, the process wins, the Constitution wins. So let's move away from the political landscape a bit. Apart from what is happening in the country in politics right now, what do you think are the primary crisis issues that you see in the US right now for brands?
Well, primary crisis issues have to do with a lot of social justice and racial justice issues, at least in the United States. I think this may be true in other countries as well. This summer, the Black Lives Matter movement was enormous, and a lot of brands were put under the microscope to see how are they responding to that demand for equity and inclusion, both in terms of their customer bases, in terms of how they treat employees, both what their actions are today versus what they have been legacy in past years. Those are very big issues. COVID, of course, is an enormous issue right now. How companies are opening, how they went about closing during shutdowns. I'm very hopeful that despite the surges in the United States, that the different businesses will not have to shut down again, but it could happen, as we're seeing in Europe and in other parts of the world. Then I would say also issues having to do with quality of products and services, and how brands can overcome attacks of misinformation that are being put out there by competitors or other adversaries. Those are big issues.
So let's move to a global canvas. I think the issues that you mentioned happening in the US are pretty much universal at this point. But when we move to a global canvas, we've also seen that a lot of social media crises are happening right now, and brands are being cyberbullied into towing the line. I want to understand from you, irrespective of whichever country that you are in, are there any fundamental universal rules that one can apply when dealing with the social media crisis?
Well, listen, I'll give an answer that lawyers always give, which is, it depends. But that's a good PR answer also, because there is no one size fits all when it comes to a social media crisis, and preventing those kinds of negative information from going viral. And each time it happens, for each company, for each brand, you have to look at it, the circumstances, and come up with a strategic response, right? And this involves, a couple of just very basic questions, like, who is doing the posting? That's the first question. Who is posting information that is harmful to the reputation of the brand? Is it a known person? Is it a human? And is it someone that you know, and can identify, right? That's the best case scenario, and allows for the most strategic set of options available for dealing with it. But many times, as you know, a viral social post is anonymous, and you don't know who the person is. There's ways to find out through cyber forensics. Sometimes you can do a little investigation, and they will reveal themselves unintentionally by, linking and posting to other things where their identity becomes known. But the anonymity is a challenge, and you need to understand if that's what you're dealing with. And then the final thing is that it might not even be a human that's putting it out. It could be a bot. And again, that's really important, because your set of tools and solutions are going to depend on that. I'd also go on to say, that it also depends where the matter is posted. Is it on Facebook? Is it on Instagram and Twitter? Is it a rating site? Is it comments to digital media? Is it its own created website. The strategies, again, depend on both who's posting, where it's being posted, and then I'll go on to say it also depends on who's seeing the post, what their activity is. Are they sharing it? Are they liking it? Is it a one time and it's done? And once you understand all those things, then you can develop the different strategies for containing it.
Okay, so I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into that. That was helpful, but how much of social media viral crises, misinformation, and fake news are now part of the issues that you're helping manage for clients?
It's fairly common. I mean, it's becoming regular, and it's happening to very large companies who have large budgets to deal with it, and it's happening to very small companies and individuals who have almost no money to deal with it. And that's a big challenge because the pain is equal for all of them.
Absolutely. So how can you help prepare a client to battle fake news? And don't say it depends.
Well, so the different options are this. If it's a limited post with limited reach on sites that are not as heavily trafficked, sometimes the best advice is to do nothing, to ignore it. Because if you engage, you're just provoking it, giving it a bigger platform, a bigger presence, more amplification than is needed. So sometimes the answer is you do nothing. But more often, there's some things that you have to do. And among the things to think about, and I have had to do this with a number of clients, is trying to just understand, is this now going to be something that's limited to social media, or is it also going to get picked up by mainstream media? If a matter is picked up by mainstream media, it becomes exponentially a bigger problem, okay? So one of the first things that I try to do is make sure that this is not something that mainstream media are going to pick up, and that we can keep it limited to what is in the social and digital world. One of the reasons why that is important is because, at least in the United States, I can't speak about this in Europe or Asia, but in the United States, there is a difference between mainstream media and social media in terms of their responsibility for the truth of what they published. The mainstream media, newspapers, TV stations, radio stations, have to verify the truth of what they're publishing, because if they publish something they know is false, and if it's also defamatory, you can sue the newspaper, you can sue the TV station. We have many examples of this in which media organizations have paid many tens of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars in some cases, when they have repeated libelous things that were put out, on social media or other. The social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc., don't have that same responsibility, because in the United States, anyway, they are, under our communications law, they are considered to just be like a public utility, like a bulletin board where anybody can come and post whatever, and they're just the vehicle. They aren't responsible for the truth. And so that's why social media is such the wild, wild west, why people post all kinds of things, sometimes anonymous, and it's just all over the place. So I'm always trying to make sure that the mainstream media don't pick things up, and I will actually get on the phone when I see things that are in the social media, and if the media has reached out to want to comment from us, I will remind them of their obligation to independently fact check. Because if they don't, and they repeat these defamatory statements, they could get sued. And that works. It works often. It's one of the things that is a very powerful and effective tool in the toolkit. Okay? But now you're going to ask the next question, I know, which is, well, what do you do about the matters that are still there percolating on the social media? They're damaging, and what can be done about that? And again, some of it has to do with, in some instances, you're going to want to go straight to that platform and publish the truthful, credible information side by side with the attack so that the readers can see for themselves, the two issues and hopefully understand, that either there's two sides or what is false and what is true. Sometimes you'll do that yourself as the brand. Sometimes it'll be through third parties who will try to clarify by engaging in the commenting back and forth. It depends.
So what is more, and what is a more effective way of dealing with it? Should a brand engage with it, or should a third party engage with it?
Well, the brand will have, the brand will have more control over the accuracy of facts, right?
Right.
And also has the legitimacy of showing, here's our response. And if they can back up their response with, evidence that's verifiable, that's very powerful. And usually, in most cases, that does the trick. But there are cases where there are certain things that need to be said, but it doesn't feel right for the brand to be the one saying it. In that case, sometimes it's good to have a third party who will say those things. And not just any third party. Sometimes it's an expert, right? Sometimes it's an expert. Sometimes it's another party who is in a position to know, who himself can be trusted. Having them speak on behalf of the brand, so the brand doesn't have to speak themselves, can be useful.
Okay. So is there a way that a PR professional or somebody who's handling that brand, can assist the client in finding the right person, one? And second, is there a way that a PR professional can actually fact check this themselves? Are there any fact checking websites that you can go to? Are there any tools that you can utilize to do this?
Well, I think the first thing that the PR person should do is to fact check. One of the big mistakes that happen a lot is that PR firms who are hired by, their clients, basically trust everything their clients say and are often sadly surprised when it turns out that it isn't what they thought it was, or that the brand gave them information that wasn't entirely correct. And so I think the first responsibility is to make sure that you're getting the accurate information from the client. You as the PR professional should ask the probing questions to make sure that the information that they're giving to you is accurate and correct, and that you can go out there on behalf of that client and advocate for them. I don't know that I, go ahead.
So let's say, does the PR team need to have a lawyer on their rolls to be able to do that? Or is there some way that they can fact check themselves?
They don't need to have a lawyer. I mean, I think that's not the case at all. They can fact check on anything that's publicly available, right? And, there's all kinds of sources of information that are available. But again, I think the PR firm needs to be in a position to be critically thinking and to be able to ask the client directly, can you verify this? I'll give you an example, right? So I had a client that had a social media problem in which a former employee, this is a very well-known restaurant group that operates in a number of states in the United States. And a former employee was angry after leaving employment with this restaurant group, and basically threw out a whole bunch of attacks on social media about this restaurant group. And some of the attacks had to do with claims that the restaurant group was not following proper COVID health protocols, and that they were being cited by, the Department of Health, and that they were exposing customers to employees who were sick, and et cetera. So in order to counter that, of course, I, as the public relations professional, have to understand, what is the facts about this? Is it true? Did the State Department of Health come and investigate them? What kinds of information or decision did they get back from the Department of Health? And it required a bunch of very probing questions, which resulted in, and by the way, the clients at that point didn't necessarily know all the answers. And so they had to have their chief operating officer go back and sort of pull up the documentation from the Department of Health, because I wanted to know for sure, very accurately, to be able to
Right.
say, no, we got clean bill of health from the State Department of Health. When they came through, they found no violations. I don't want to say that and then find out later, well, they came back a second time and then they found something, and then we're in trouble because then we're backtracking and we've lost our credibility. So
Absolutely.
the goal, the number one important thing for the PR professional is to be prepared to probe a little bit with the client and say, no, what does this mean? Okay, so you got a clean bill of health on this month. What about the month before? What about the month after? You know, where there's any problem, I mean, you have to ask the questions to get to the truth, and then you can feel safe to go out and put your statement out knowing that it can't be challenged.
Okay, I have a question for you there then. What happens, let's say, once you take up a client and you're passionate about defending them, you believe in them, and midway you find out that, well, they lied. Yeah. What in your opinion would be the best advice for a PR professional who's just found out that the client lied to them, right? How do you backtrack from there? Because along with the client, your own reputation is at stake here.
Well, I think it's extraordinarily important for the integrity of our profession that PR professionals never lie, and always tell the truth. There's different ways to share truthful information, but none of it requires outright lies. And if the client has lied, you need to discern as a professional whether it was a mistake, an innocent error, or if it really was a lie with an intent to deceive. And then you have to go back. Here's what I would do. I would go back to the client and say, okay, we've put this statement out and it's not true. And so we need to go back and correct this and explain it. And we can explain it as having been, again, an innocent error or a misunderstanding or whatever, and demonstrate the intent to correct. But if the client is not willing to do it, then you as a PR professional have to make a decision whether you're going to continue to work for this client. Because if they've demonstrated that they are willing to lie and they won't go back and change it and correct it at your advice, in that situation, I might very well say, I'm done and I resign from the engagement.
Yeah. What's the best way to resign from such a situation?
Well, I would send a letter saying, thank you for the opportunity to work with you. I think we view the situation in different ways, and that I don't think I can be effective in helping to continue to advise you, and I'm going to withdraw from the engagement. And of course, my engagement letters allow for the termination of an agreement by either party, by them or by me, just with a month's notice. So if that's a situation, listen, to me, integrity and honesty and my own reputation for those things are a top priority. So there's never going to be an engagement in which I'm going to compromise that, because that's everything that I have to offer in the world, and the media in particularly respects that about me, so that they know when I go to the media and I'm speaking on behalf of my clients, they know they can take it to the bank. They know that I will be honest. They know that I'm truthful. They know that I'm not just spinning, and I can't jeopardize that.
No, absolutely. I think our own reputations is the best currency that we deal with in the industry. 2020 seems to be a packed year for social media crisis for comms professionals. Can you share with us some of the tense situations that you've diffused this year, apart from the COVID case that you mentioned? Or we can also go back to your extensive career and maybe pull out some cliffhangers. Can you share some with us?
Okay. Well, there was a very interesting matter that I had earlier this year that involved a company that owned a whole series of elder care facilities, nursing homes all over the United States. And this company, like many, employ many nurses that come from the Philippines in order to sort of fill in a gap that we have for trained healthcare professionals in the United States. Again, it got started by one of these nurses who ended up being terminated for performance issues, and she got very angry and went to a major daily newspaper in a state and told a story about how this group of nursing homes, this healthcare provider, was recruiting and bringing these nurses to the United States from the Philippines and engaging essentially in human trafficking, which is a very, very explosive accusation. And this news organization went and did an extensive investigative media report about this, which we participated in. I participated in helping the client explain what this whole system is of bringing these nurses to the United States, and it did not involve human trafficking. Nonetheless, the newspaper went ahead and did a full front page, not just a bunch above the fold, the whole front page of the Sunday paper, an investigative report about this. And they promoted it on social media, this newspaper. The nurse and a number of her friends then spread this, shared these newspaper articles. They went all the way, global around the world, and particularly back into the Philippines, which was going to be very damaging to the reputation of this company and their ability to continue to recruit trained nurses from them. And so it was really a very devastating thing. In addition, the current residents of these nursing homes, their families, were shocked to learn that, their caregivers had been human trafficked. I mean, that's what the accusation was. The other employees, the other caregivers in these facilities were also shocked to hear that their partners there who are providing care were human trafficked. It was a really terrible thing. And it turned out that this story was not true. The story was false, and the media got it wrong. This mainstream newspaper got it wrong. The investigative reporter had decided he wanted to tell a story, and he made the facts fit his story, and it didn't matter that we had provided other information that made it clear that the story was false. He went with it anyway. So what ended up happening is we went, I worked directly with the editors of the newspaper, and I made clear to them after the story came out exactly what parts of the story were false and demanded correction and retraction, under threat that we would actually sue this newspaper. And the facts were such that the newspaper ended up having to not only retract most of the story, right? So the digital version of the story was basically obliterated. They had to retract most of it. They had to pull down their Twitter accounts about it. They had to pull down their Facebook posts about it. And we were able to really change the narrative and pull down all the negative things so that now in the future, if you go back and Google about my client or about this whole story about whether Filipino nurses are being human trafficked, all of that negative stuff doesn't exist anymore. It was part of a settlement. And in fact, the newspaper ended up paying many tens of thousands of dollars to my client, even though we didn't sue. We just pointed out to them that we could sue, and we were likely to do that unless they A, paid some money, and B, removed all of the false information from the story. I mean, from basically their story and on social media.
Right. I mean, that was a huge risk taken by the publication.
Enormous.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, it was amazing that, it's amazing that they did an out-of-court settlement. I'm assuming that's because they understood that they were in the wrong.
Yeah, because they have lawyers. And I think what the lesson is here is don't be afraid to dig in deep and go back to the publication or go back to the person who's posted something and demand that it be changed. A lot of times people just think like, and even in this case, it was true. The initial reaction of the client when they saw the story was, we really got killed in this story. Let's start thinking about PR strategies to, try to improve our reputation. And which is also important to do. But I was the one who said, well, wait, we don't have to just accept that we got this terrible story. I mean, I'm going through this and I can say, like, they wrote this, but they know that's not true because I told them it wasn't true. I gave them the truth at the time before they published. And then they wrote this, and then they wrote this. And so the clients at that point said, okay, let's see if we can get them to correct. And so we went back and we got them to correct. Now, let me just say this, not every engagement with media where you ask for corrections also involves a threat of litigation, right? Sometimes you just want them to correct. And most of the time, many media are willing to correct because their own credibility is on the line. And if you come back and you say, you know what, you got this part of the story wrong, and I'd like you to add this. Because we live in a digital world, we can't necessarily change what they put on the television on the news last night, or we might not decide that we want a printed correction in the next newspaper. But you definitely want to try to correct what's online digitally because that stuff lives forever.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think when I'm assuming when you would call, which is a combination of a lawyer and a comms person, it gets their attention. But I've also seen that if you dig your heels in, like you mentioned, and are not afraid to question the publication, it usually delivers results because they usually don't expect you to do that. They expect you to take it lying down, right? And that you've been beaten. That's it. But I think it's you're right when you say that it's a responsibility of the PR professional to give courage to their own clients to be able to take such a step.
That's right. And sometimes, let me just say, sometimes the errors that are in these news stories are not malicious. They're not intentional by the news organization. Sometimes it's just the product of the world in which we live in, which is that speed matters more than accuracy. That, being first is most important. And so the diligence in which reporters and journalists have been trained to fact check is just much more compromised now. Everybody feels like they'll get it out first and correct it later. And so a lot of times when I go back and ask for the correction, there's no pushback. They're like, okay, sure, sorry, and they'll correct. It's only when in the example I gave you with the investigative piece, that reporter was really dug in because he believed in the story and he thought that he was writing something that was going to win some big journalism Pulitzer Prize, right? And he just got it really, really wrong.
It's amazing that on one end there are more and more laws that protect, that talk about cyberbullying, that talk about protection when we live in the online world. On the other end, and even there are also fact-checking laws or fact-checking sites that are there. But on the other end, speed wins over accuracy every time.
Yeah, well, I think it just turns out it's the financial imperative, right? Is being first, getting the most clicks. So you put a headline that's very attractive and sensational that might not match the story, but it's designed to get eyeballs and clicks. I mean, there's just a lot of financial pressures on news organizations these days.
Yeah. That's the world that we live in, I guess.
It is.
So, tell us, I'd love to hear more about it. I'd love to hear more examples from you on all the stuff that you've been doing. And I'm sure if you write a book, right, a lot of those cases would be interesting for a lot of PR professionals out there, right? But I would like to ask you, what does the remaining year hold for you, and where do you see the future for your organization in the coming year? I believe this year has seen a lot of change in the PR industry as well, and if I'm not wrong, you would have been busier than ever.
It's been a very busy year. And
Absolutely.
it goes in trends, and sometimes I've been correct in predicting where the workflow will be, and other times I've been wrong. So at the beginning of COVID, I thought that after we helped clients, deal with these issues of opening and closing and things and that, I thought that I was going to be doing a lot of work on behalf of companies that were filing bankruptcy or needing to reorganize. I did a lot of that work in 2008 when we had the big recession. And so far that has not been the case. So I think what's coming in the year ahead is going to be a continued focus on some of the social justice issues. There's just a lot of activism, at least in the United States, about this. And I expect to see a lot more of that work. I think there's going to be a lot more work of companies trying to fight disinformation. The
Right.
disinformation and the fake news is not just in the political arena, it's in the commercial arena too. And clients are struggling to figure out how to address that. And some of the tools, as we talked about, some of those tools require public relations response, some of them require legal response, some of them required a technical response, of using cyber forensic experts and things like that.
Interesting. So, you've been in the PRBI network for quite some time, right?
That's right.
I want this chat since we are hosting this on PRBI. What has the experience been like for you?
I've been very, very glad to be a member of PRBI for a lot of years. I think I've been a member maybe almost for 8 or 10 years now. And I have so much respect for our fellow members who are from all over the world, and who have expertise, some as generalists, some who are expert in specific industries or specific kinds of communications. I've learned a lot from my colleagues, and it's been incredible to have access to people who are in different geographic locations and with different specialties to not just to learn from, but also to sort of supplement capabilities for my clients. And I think my clients really value that, knowing that I have this network. And our network is selective. We don't just let anybody in. You have to be vetted and approved by the other members. And we have good geographic reach, but we're still small enough that we know each other. And I think that's really important, because there are, in the legal field and in the PR field, lots of networks and of small professionals who kind of gather together to say that they have bigger reach. But if you don't know the people, then you can't really advocate to your clients and say, I have a trusted partner who can help me do this. And that partner is in India, or that partner is in London, or that partner is in Los Angeles. It's been very valuable. I've had the chance to collaborate with some of my fellow members, and it's just a fantastic group. I think we all benefit and our clients benefit.
Absolutely. I've seen the benefits myself as well. And I think all our clients appreciate the fact that we bring in such specialized local knowledge from different parts of the country, different parts of the world. So you have had some successful collaborations with PRBI members. Can you share a few examples with us?
Sure. So I worked collaboratively on a litigation from one of our members from Europe, who had a client from his country that had a very high profile litigation in the United States. And so we partnered together so that I was the on the ground person in the US and was able to provide not just sort of help in understanding the legal process, but also doing the media relations and that PR campaign on behalf of that client here in the United States. And that was a very successful engagement. I have worked with others here in the United States. Joy Scott, specifically in Los Angeles, we have a collaboration together because she specializes in healthcare. And a lot of my clients who face crises are healthcare providers. And so we've been supportive of each other's clients where her expertise is very valuable to me, and my ability to manage crises is very valuable to her.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so nice to see, partners collaborating across boundaries, across geographies as such. So, I don't know where the hour flew by, but I would want to understand from you three things that you would advise when they move into 2021 from your perspective.
Can you repeat the question? Because I think we got a little break in the internet right when you were speaking. Can you repeat?
Okay. So tips, your best advice for PR entrepreneurs as we move into 2021?
Best advice for PR entrepreneurs. I think at the beginning, if you're getting started, it's pretty good to identify a specific niche or industry segment that you want to focus on. I think that will help you become an expert, which obviously provides the most valuable to clients, and also will help you present yourself when you're out looking for clients, how your profile is out on the internet and elsewhere. I would focus on kind of specialization at the front end, and then build from there.
Awesome, awesome. So that brings us to the end of our session today. Big thank you to you, Amy, for sharing your insights today on PR and how not to go viral on social media. I know I learned many things from you today, and I'm sure to implement that with my clients as well. Wishing you and your agency many successful years ahead.
Thank you, Tarun, and I'm just so excited to be able to see you in person again when we are done with this pandemic and our group, PRBI, can gather together as we do every year in person. It's been great spending time with you in the past, and I look forward to that again.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it too.
Okay.
So that was Amy Rothenberg speaking to us about how not to go viral. Thank you again for joining us for these sessions. And this concludes season 1 of our live sessions. We will be taking a break from all our live sessions for this year. We'll see you again for season 2 at our next live session early next year with several interesting conversations from seasoned PR professionals from the global PRBI network. Till then, you can view all our live sessions on Facebook or on our YouTube channel. Just look for PRBI, PR Boutiques International, and you'll find us right there. If you have any questions for any of our experts, then drop us a note in the comments section and we will answer them for you. We will see you next year. Till then, stay